of all the questions, I think there's only one with a right and a wrong answer in your list of questions.
I know
You know,
exactly what you're going to say. I totally know what you're going to say, and I can't wait.
Can
what
can can you guess, Lindsay, which question
Yeah.
it's going to be?
what is
Can I
it?
guess?
Guess.
Yeah,
Toilet paper over or under?
right there. Toilet paper over or under?
Oh my
It is
God!
over. Why would anyone go with under? I think that's a litmus test. You say toilet paper over under. If they say under, you walk away from the first
Bye-bye.
date right there, right?
Totally agree with you.
Completely agree.
I'm Sara Jane Ho, and this is Mind Your Manners, where no topic is off limits as we uncover the secrets to feeling at ease in every situation.
Relationships are part romance, part practicality, and today we're breaking down both. Our guest, Lindsay Jill Roth, is an author and relationship expert whose new book, Romances and Practicalities, offers 250 insightful questions designed to deepen connection and build lasting love. And today, we're putting those questions to the test. Me and my friend Marcel are going to ask Lindsay to take us through the entire life cycle of a relationship. What to ask when you're casually dating, what to ask when things get serious, what to ask before marriage, and even the tough questions that can help navigate challenges down the road. So if you've ever wondered how to make your love story last, this is your perfect starting point. Grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's dive in. Lindsay, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you both.
So, Lindsay, why did you choose to write a relationship book by asking questions? Because that's a deliberate choice.
So I first and foremost chose to write a relationship book because I needed this book when I was trying to find my person. And this book, this method, what I needed didn't exist. And I needed better help communicating. I needed to understand what I was bringing to the table in relation to the people that I was seeing. And I really needed a tool that wasn't the rules, that wasn't, he's just not that into you. I'm sort of a very take charge of your own life person, as I know you are, Sarah. And I've been so confident in areas of my life, like my career and education and that kind of thing, but I wasn't in my personal life. So this process and this book is my love story meets a curated questionnaire that I created that's now backed by scientific fact and lots of subject matter experts to prove that you can achieve healthy, lasting love by starting with the practicality. So part 2 of your question is why questions? And to be perfectly honest with you, questions, because people don't always know what to ask at all aspects of their relationship. So like when you're single, when you're dating, when you're on the cusp of commitment, and then when you're committed. And also because people just don't ask questions. They don't keep getting to know the person that they're with. And so this tool not only helped me find and stay with my person, but it's here to help people at all different levels of their relationships.
I have a question. How did you come up with this list? Because as I'm reading this list, I'm feeling like so many of these questions are speaking directly to me and things that have caused issues in my past relationship, things that recent breakthroughs that I've had where I'm like, oh yeah, like that's a question that I didn't ask until like 7 years into our relationship. Had I asked that earlier, they probably could have avoided like 50 to 100 fights, like just
Right?
like single questions. So
Well,
how did you come up with this insane, like 250 questions? That's a lot of questions.
I feel like we should dig into what you're saying way more than
Oh,
we should dig into what I'm saying. But yeah. So I found myself in a situation, and the story's all in the book, but I found myself in this situation where I had fallen for someone who had to be moved back to his country of origin, which was England, and I was based in New York, and we were falling for each other. And we were on FaceTime one night, as one does. And I said something, and I didn't know I was on the cusp of this pivotal moment, but I said something, and he had this very visceral response that was, I just don't know you well enough yet. And it sounded prettier in his English accent than me just saying it now. But that like shot me in the heart. Like him saying that was like, what do you mean you just don't know me well enough yet. Like, what am I doing? I'm on FaceTime with you. I'm talking to you. I'm opening myself up to you. But he was saying that there was more. And it's funny now that I know him now because I'm married to him. I can't imagine him being the first person to initiate that, but he did. And I didn't do what I would have done in the past, which was run. In the past, I would have just said, well, then that's your issue if you don't feel like, you know me well enough yet. I totally leaned in to what he was saying. At that moment, I could tell you where I was in my house, what I was wearing, like time stopped for me. And I had this moment of, okay, he doesn't think he knows me well enough yet. He's worth it. But I don't know how to get to know him better. I don't know how. And that moment was the first moment of we need to ask each other better questions. We need to ask each other different questions. We're talking about things, but there gets to a point where you can't talk about like what you do, what you like, where you go want to go on holiday. You know what I mean? Where you have to get deeper. And so I Googled that night. I literally just went to Google, how do you get to know someone better? And that moment, I read lots of articles and I thought, okay, this is the start of this new story for me and how I'm going to be in this relationship. And it happened organically from there. I started saying, okay, what are the things we need to know about, right? Money, sex, religion, health, family. And then it broadened from there. What does money mean? Family includes potential in-laws, kids. There's so much to talk about having kids, but how it affects your life in so many ways. And this list was really organic. And there were 250 questions on there, not to scare you, but everyone can find a different on ramp to them. And like Marcel, Sarah, me, we're all on this call, right? We're coming at our relationships each from a different place. So the questions that we are going to choose to start with are going to be different because we are different.
The second part of that question is you created this list very organically, but then you kind of went out and talked to a lot of people. Did the list kind of get rounded out by those
Absolutely.
conversations? Okay. Okay.
So I would be on the phone or interviewing or in person with someone like Dr. Nicole LaPera, or choose Susie Orman, for example, because her concentration is money and finances. And I would run through not only my concept with her, but this is what I'm asking. What am I missing? I wasn't afraid to ask because the goal is to help people. So if she thought I was missing certain questions, of course I would add those two. So yes, it didn't start at 250. It could have gone to 500 and then it was brought down to 250.
I wish I read this book right out of college when I was single and first started dating, because reading it, there were just so many aha moments, and I kind of I used to be like you. I mean, I've been a very go-getter in my education, in my career, and most of my life. But in my love life, I went through my 20s and most of my 30s questionless because I was rudderless and I lacked the confidence. Anytime something didn't seem to go right, I would do what you did, which was run. And
it's easy to do that.
You're never really like facing the real issue, which is that you need to be able to be intimate with someone. Like that was my biggest issue. And intimacy isn't sex. Intimacy is, that emotional intimacy. Yeah. I wish I had this when I was right out of when I just started dating.
One of the most sad things about our lives is when we go through our life, letting our life happen to us versus choosing how we attack our lives. So many people do that in their careers, right? They have a goal and they go for it. But with their personal lives, they just let it happen. And it's 2025. Let's not let our relationships, whether romantic, interpersonal, friendships, family, let's not let it happen. In my mind, there's nothing more fulfilling than being a great friend. And I personally love being a wife and a partner. This book is not about getting married. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to get married. But I personally love being in a couple. But I love being in the right couple and a healthy couple. And that's what I want to see people have. Whatever coupledom means to them, whatever long-term relationship means to them. If that's 2 years, great. If that's 2 months, great. If that's a lifetime, awesome.
I think also and I think it connects to kind of what both of you guys were saying, but I feel like I had such a hard time choosing to fully commit to somebody.
Why?
Because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know these questions that I should be asking myself. Because I think that's part of these questions. It's not just questions for you to ask this other person. I think what was eye-opening for me about reading these questions is, oh, I haven't asked myself some of these questions, even now. And part of why I was afraid to commit to kind of proposing or spending a life together with someone that I had been with for many years was because I hadn't done kind of the work to figure out what I needed, why I was feeling certain ways. Part of the process of kind of reading your questions, it's kind of it's a lot of therapy, really, in kind of like question form of figuring out why you feel certain ways based on kind of how your parents interacted with you, how they interacted with each other, what things might you be taking from childhood that you haven't analyzed.
You're
So all of,
taking
yeah,
them whether you know it or not. Like it's defaulted into you, like you drink it, right?
yeah.
And sometimes it takes a really strong self to think about it and analyze it. Other times you have a great partner or friend who can say, hey, like, can we just examine this together? But other than that, it's not a natural thing to go to that place on your own. And so if you have a guide, doesn't make it any less painful sometimes, but it makes it easy to know what you should be asking yourself. I mean, in the past, right? Hundreds of years ago, 50 years ago, I mean, when there was a lot more structured religion for people, right? There was pre-Cana, there was marital counseling, there were requirements in the church, for example, to go meet and hammer out certain things before taking a big life step. And a lot of us have lost that, and people go to therapy together. But the theory behind that was good. The theory behind that was this.
I have friends who are part of the church, and they do that today to this day. And I actually asked them, I was like, can you send me your questions? Because I don't go to church, but it sounds fascinating.
I spoke with people who did that pre-Cana marital counseling, and the most common thing I heard from them was, wow, I was so surprised. It was so much fun. And we barely touched on religion. It was more about life.
Just kind of like the simplified version is like you need to know what you want before you can know who you want and who will be a good partner for you.
And you need to know where you really are quite flexible and what you're not flexible about. And Sarah and I, we saw each other last week, and we were talking about things like deal breakers, right? And if you are holding on to someone needing to be 6 foot to 6'4", that's something you need to examine, and you need to examine why. That's probably something that you could let go. Versus, do you need someone who's the same religion as you are?
Yeah, I think this is actually a great jumping point to really diving in. And I'd really like our conversation to serve as a guide for listeners out there, accompanying them on a journey through the life cycle of a relationship with which questions, specific questions, we should be asking at each stage. So I guess like stage one would be when you're single, before you're dating. That's what I'm hearing you guys say.
Yeah. Before we jump into life cycle, I just want to give a little preface out there. Every relationship is different. So if you are with someone and you feel like, you know what, this sounds a little deep for now, but I feel right about asking it, and you're listening to this podcast and you're like, they didn't say to say that severe question so early. If you feel it's right, then it's right. And there have been so many studies, whether when you move in with someone, it's about how you do it, not when you do it, right? So it could be after a month, but if you do it intentionally and thoughtfully and you decide to move in with someone, then you will succeed. If you do it after a month because one of your rents is going away and you want to move in together, that's also fine. But if you don't talk about it or do it intentionally, then you're not setting yourself up to succeed. So just a preface here that this is a guide and these are some fun suggestions for you, but do it as your heart feels.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, all right. So when you're single, Lindsay, what was your dating life before getting married, before meeting the Brit?
I was that girl who people would say, I want to set you up with someone, but I don't have anyone good enough. And so then I wasn't, and I can imagine you were this way too, right? And then so I wasn't set up at all. And I was just dying for people to throw any suggestion against a wall because I wanted to meet someone. I was online dating and I was trying to meet people, but I was so trying to find it that I was losing sight of what it was. So I was losing myself. So someone would ask me a question and I would start answering in the way that I thought he would want me to answer, not in a way that was truly my authentic self or feeling. Because I just wanted to get to the finish line in a way. As horrible as that sounds. What was yours like?
I spent the first chunk of my dating life in the States, right? So sort of college. I really only started dating after college. And I was in New York, and I always felt like if it was kind of my bucket list thing where if you're single and you're young, you have to be in New York, like dating the field. So I had a lot of fun. I also had my first serious relationship, like that I, with someone who I loved. Uh, and then and then I was off. Oh, and then I went to business school, and then I went off to China. So like the second half of my dating life was in China. And then also for me, Mandarin was kind of like this new language, right? So I was like dating in Mandarin, which is a new language I had to learn. I was kind of like you, where people be like, "Oh yeah, I would love to set you up with someone, but or you must be single because there's no one good enough for you."
Yeah. You're like, no, that's not true. Please find me someone. Or you have your stuff to get, you're so together. You must be fine about it.
Well, China's very conservative, so nobody says you're fine being single. People like, "What's wrong with you if you're single?"
Okay.
But so people just be like, "Oh, you must be too picky."
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I saw that you actually, when you were in college, you took this class at Northwestern on love and marriage.
So I didn't take it. It's the one class that I would have loved to take, and it was taught by. It is taught. It's the number one most popular class at Northwestern. It's taught by Dr. Alexandra Solomon, and she's incredible. She's an incredible therapist. I interview her in this book. She talks about boundaries and relationships and communication, and we learn through classes or education or being taught about so many things in our lives, but no one actually tells us how to be in a romantic relationship. I mean, that's where your parents or your parental figures, whoever raised you, that's where it sort of is a default onto your life. But imagine if we were taught how to love properly or taught how to love healthily versus left to our own devices. How cool would that be?
That's really important. Like it's kind of like two of the most important things, right? Like how to love and how to deal with finances, like how to do taxes, right? Like how to not overspend. Those are the two things that are kind
Huge.
of the most important things about being an adult. And yeah, where it's like, take all these history classes, learn all these facts that you're gonna forget. But these two things that you could really use. Let's skip over these. That's amazing that class existed. I also just want to say, like as I'm thinking about back to like the last time I was single, which was like my late 20s. I just remember it was kind of I just gotten out of like a 3-year relationship. It ended in a difficult way, and then I was kind of like on my own, just thinking about the future, not having any idea of like, am I gonna get married at some point? Do I want kids? Like not knowing any of that, just randomly going on like swiping on Tinder, going on like these dates that were just so like none were it was so clearly not a fit from like for both of us. Like as soon as we got on the date, it was like there's got to be such a better way. And then I finally met the woman who would become my wife randomly at like a concert at a bar. And thank God, because otherwise I'd still be living with roommates in Queens right now. But then it took a long time to kind of get from that point. By the way, I'm doing a lot of caveats, but your book, Lindsay, kind of reminded me. I haven't watched Sex and the City, but it felt like I was reading Sex and the City as I was learning about kind
Thank
of your
you.
whirlwind love story. It was amazing.
It's fun. It was
Um,
fun.
yeah, I got to that point where, okay, I finally had someone, and similar to what you describe in your book as kind of like your relationship kind of didn't move forward until you made an ultimatum. And I know that the Brit says that ultimatum was not why he ultimately came back. But for me and my relationship, the only reason we're still together and we're married is because every time I was too scared to move forward, my then girlfriend at the time like would like break up with me, and that would be the thing that I needed to be like, what am I doing? I want to be with this person. Let's take it to that next level. I don't think would have happened had I kind of had the education, had I known the questions to ask, had I learned enough about myself by asking those questions.
Are your parents divorced?
No.
Oh,
They're
interesting.
together. Yeah,
Interesting. What
they're
do you think was so scary for you?
so I'm the youngest of five. I'd seen my four siblings get married. I think I moved to New York City to pursue a career in songwriting and performance. I want to be a performer. And that was always kind of like the A plan, but I always went with the B plan instead. And then I became very successful at that. And I enjoyed doing that and I was getting good at it. But I was at a point where I was kind of trying to make a decision like my life could go two different ways. And I was kind of paralyzed. And until I made a decision about what I wanted in my professional life, and felt secure in kind of how much money I was making, all that, I felt like I couldn't make a decision about what I wanted in a relationship and where I wanted that part of my life to take me. I felt like if I had committed at that point, I would be saying no to all this other stuff. And that fear paralyzed me. And it wasn't until my sister-in-law said, there is no right choice. You choose one thing and then you make that the best choice. And that to me was an eye opener. And once I made that choice, I never looked back. And it was the best possible thing.
A lot of men that I interviewed and spoke to actually felt the same way that you did. They felt like they couldn't be the partner that they ultimately wanted to be until their career was on track.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, like, yeah, I've heard so many guy friends say that, and even, guys I've dated say that. So in
But
light of
here's the
that, like,
thing. Wait, sorry, I'm interrupting you for a second, but here's the thing. How much as a woman, like Sarah, if you're in this situation with Marcel, let's put this together here. If you're in this situation with Marcel and you're unsure as to whether he wants to go forward, you're kind of seeing you like him, and he says to you, I'm in this really weird crossroads with my career right now. It's not that I don't want to commit, but I'm having these feelings of like to be a better partner to you. I just wish this was more on track. What a great
so
moment for
actually, I
your
had that.
relationship.
Yeah, but I had that with my husband because my
Not with
husband
me. Not
is,
with me.
yeah,
That was a
but I
fictitious
actually,
situation. Back to reality.
yeah, so my husband, he has his most recent project is a real estate project in China, and the economy is post COVID like really tanking in China, and real estate is leading that that tanking situation. And he had expressed that he was very very serious. He wanted to be committed. He wanted us to be husband and wife, and I was fully on board. And I just felt, I felt so safe around him. I felt like he was, I knew I wanted to be married to him. And he said, well, caveat, like this, my most recent project is very risky, especially with the way the economy is going now. How about we wait till after the project is sold, and then that I'm, liquid and blah, 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 all these things, because I don't know which way this could go right now. And I said, yes, I said, I believe in you and I want to be by your side no matter what way this goes. So let's make this, we know we want to be together. Let's just move forwards on this together. And whatever challenges come, we'll face them together. And so that's how we solve that. But like, I want to keep us on track, all right? Because I want to know, like, before jumping into dating, what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves that help us understand ourselves?
There are three here that I picked out just as three
Let's go with
examples.
one. Let's
Oh
go with one.
no,
Your favorite
no.
one.
I can't do that.
Because me and Marcel picked out our ones too.
Oh, you picked only
Oh,
one.
no. Go. I misunderstood the assignment. So Lindsay, go with all three.
Oh. Okay, here are three that I picked. So, do you want to emulate your parents' marriage or relationship? Why or why not? And then piggybacking on that, is there a couple other than your parents whose relationship you respect or whose relationship has served as a guide for you? And then the third one that I threw in there, because I spoke to a ton of people where this was an issue either in past relationships or in current relationships. Would you convert religions at the request of your partner? Would you ask a partner or potential partner to convert? Why or why not? And the why or why not is very important, almost more important than the question.
Are these first date questions? What
No,
Lindsay,
these are when you're single questions.
Oh, these are when you're single. Okay, so these are for yourself. Okay, got it. I was like, man, these are
She
going
just
in
jumps right in
strong on
there.
first date. Hi, I'm Lindsay. By the way, tell me
Hi.
about your
You want to
parents'
convert?
relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. These are when you're single. Got it.
Actually, a lot of those resonated with me, and my favorite was question 12, how did your family members communicate, share, and argue growing up? And also question 13, how did your family resolve conflict? Do you approve or disapprove, and what would you change or not change? Like, I realized almost too late, like a number of relationships in, and probably not till my like late 20s, that I was just emulating my mother. And she would give silent treatment whenever she was upset with my dad. She'd be pissy for days. She would just not speak to you. But then if you tried to speak with her, she'd be like, oh, everything's fine. Nothing's wrong. And it just really wasn't a healthy way to communicate at all. And I realized like I was doing this with really meaningful people in my relationships. And looking back now, I really regret the way I behaved or acted when I was facing conflict in those relationships. And it took me a lot of reading and a lot of therapy to get out, to break that cycle.
Thank you for sharing that, by the way. That's really big.
Yours was number 13, right, Sarah? So I didn't know this at the time, but the thing that I wish I had known was number 12, which is, how did your family members communicate, share, and argue growing up? Because what I've learned over kind of all the fights that I've had, this is probably like the biggest question to me that I kind of just figured out. And I figured it out also recently with one of my brothers. We have kind of the same trigger. And it's kind of like, if someone asks us a question in an accusatory tone, we like that's it. Like, we cannot get back to what was actually happening in the conversation. We escalate immediately. And then if you're with someone who also doesn't take kindly to someone your voice is raised, which is my wife, she's a Colombian, then we end up in this spiral. And it's the same thing with my brother. And we were on kind of vacation, and his wife mentioned that he had this kind of trigger. And I was like, I have the same thing. And it was because of how we communicated with our parents, or how our parents, my mom, sometimes communicated with us when she was frustrated. And that, like, anytime anyone kind of talks to us, we're like back to like a 12-year-old kid, and you kind of lose all the lessons and all the patience that you've kind of developed over the years because of that one thing. And it's not like when anyone talks to you, it's when that person that you love that says something in a way that sounds like aggressive or accusatory, even if they don't mean it that way. Colombians and Latins, the way that they ask questions is often using the negative. So it's not like, did you pick up your clothes? It's, you didn't pick up your clothes. And
Right,
you didn't
right.
pick up your clothes sounds like an accusation. I'm like, I
I
did
would
pick up
not.
my
I
clothes.
would not
You
handle
didn't pick
that.
up your clothes the other day. And
I
so
would
now
not
all of a
handle
sudden
that
we're fighting
well.
about nothing.
I wouldn't do well with that.
Yes. So anyway, that's mine.
This is a good question for when you're single. But one of the most popular questions in the book is, how do you argue? I'm paraphrasing, but how do you fight? How do you argue? And what reminded me about that question when you just brought it up was, here's the thing. If you know how you argue, if you know what triggers you, you can then have a productive conversation with your partner about how you argue, so that when you argue, you can do it respectfully. And when you argue respectfully, because you know how your partner argues, you can actually argue about the thing that you're arguing about. You're not getting inflamed about the accusatory tone, or that you feel like a 12-year-old, because you can adjust your levels before you go in. And that sets up a lifetime of healthier arguing. And arguing's not unhealthy. Arguing is healthy. But when you're arguing about how you're arguing versus the issue, it just is a whole other thing, right?
Well, one thing my husband did early in our relationship, before we even had our first fight, was he said, if we ever get into an argument, if you come at me hard, I will come at you harder. And if you come at me soft, I will come at you softer.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
He was communicating, he was teaching me how to argue with him. And the first time we
You
had
have to ask the question to yourself first, right? That's great that he knew.
Oh yeah,
that.
he went in there, he just told me, like when we started dating early days. And then, sure enough, we got into our first argument, and I kind of like dug my heels in. And then he went like full on, like, spikes. We're sort of at an impasse. And then I kind of remembered what he said to me, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just try this. And then I just went and I apologized, and he completely melted. He was like, my dear wife, if you were never wrong, then your fault would be that you were imperfect. Or, I was like, what is going? This is like a totally different person, you know? But then, yeah, he taught me how to argue with him.
There's a great story in the book. I'll never forget this interview that I had, and you guys read about it, about a woman who expected her husband to take out the trash every night before bed. And she would get legitimately pissed when she didn't. But the only problem was she never told him that was her expectation. So he was failing. She was setting him up to fail. And here's the thing. She realized that her dad took out the trash every night before they went to bed. And so it was something she expected but never communicated. So once she said that little silly thing that meant so much to her, he was like, oh, all I have to do to have some sex tonight is take out the trash? Like, great, right? Then that set them up on a better path. Something as little as that they didn't communicate about was all the way back to her childhood.
And you know what's funny is that a lot of people, a lot of women I speak to, they're like, I shouldn't have to tell him these things. He should just know. And I'm like, no, nobody knows, because nobody is inside your head. Okay, so I love that segment of questions we should be asking even before we're dating to better understand ourselves and bring that into whatever relationship we go into.
Yep.
Now, what about when we go on a first date with someone, or like, the first few dates? I feel like date 1, date 2, date 3. What are the questions that we want to ask early on that focus on sparking meaningful conversation, but don't feel too heavy, because it helps you check for compatibility, right? Like, you're asking questions that reveal values, interests, and personality, but while keeping things light.
So I'm sorry I chose 3 because you're asking me to choose between my children, and I have 250 of them, so I just can't do that. Okay, so 3 of them that I chose, and there are plenty more. One is, where's your happy place and why? Describe it physically. That's a question that many people will go back to their childhood and tell you great things about them, and you learn like, oh, they loved swimming in the sea early, or it was my grandparents' house. Great, tell me about your grandparents. And it very swiftly diffuses an awkward situation to you're actually communicating about fun personal things, but there's no stakes there. So that's one. Number 2 is, if we were stuck on a desert island together, what natural strengths would you bring to the table to help you survive and thrive? Because natural strengths, not like what stuff would you bring, right? There's a stuff question too, but you can really learn about someone. Like I say, my husband's my life navigator, not only because I feel so comfortable with him, like planning our life together, but when we are on trips, he is like the guy that's great with maps. Great. He's my life navigator. And then number 3, what's on your bucket list? And I like this because it's a fun, lofty, perhaps even hypothetical question, but you're sitting across from someone and you're going to know, do they want to get a higher education? Do they want to travel the world? And you're like, I don't even have a passport. Like, maybe you should talk about that. Do they want to become an artist when they get older? What is it? What are they ticking off? You don't have to decide that moment if your future goals align, but you do get a sense of the kind of person who's sitting with you.
These are also kind of like, creative questions too, where you can kind of, there's no pressure that you're going to say, it's not like, do you want kids or not? Right. Where it's like, there's probably an answer that you have in your head, and it's like, that probably won't change. Like, there's no pressure that these have to be the same answers, like a year from now or whatever. And they can spark fun conversations, which I think is good.
Also, if you're sitting with someone and you ask them any of these questions and they're not willing to play along with you, then you also have your answer.
So I think on the first date, this is of all the questions, I think there's only one with a right and a wrong answer in your list of questions.
I know exactly what you're going to say. I totally know what you're going to say, and I can't wait.
Can you guess, Lindsay, which question it's going to be?
What is
Can
it?
I guess?
Yeah.
Toilet paper over or under?
Right there. Toilet paper over or under.
Oh my
It is
God.
over. Why would anyone go with under? I think that's a litmus test. You say toilet paper over under. If they say under, you walk away from the first date right there, right?
Totally agree with you.
Completely agree. As
Yeah.
an etiquette expert, toilet paper is always over. Yes, they say what? Beards are cooler than mullets. Like, you should never have the toilet paper under. And I do judge.
Okay,
I
good.
knew. I
So
knew it.
you
I
snuck
knew
that
it.
one in there, Lindsay. You snuck that one in there. I think like there should be an asterisk. If they say under, leave immediately.
They're gone.
They are a serial killer.
So when I was at my Barnes and Noble launch event last week, the host under, she liked it under, and yeah, it came up, and I was like, "Are you joking right now? Like in front of all
Oh
these
my God.
people, we're gonna have this argument?" And then the audience started chiming in, and it was hysterical.
Along that vein, you should add another question, which is shoes in the house or no shoes in the house? Because
Mm.
that
I
gets
really
people
should
going.
have. And that is, I find that has become less of a cultural thing than it was, and a lot of people just take their shoes off or have thoughts on that. That's one that should be in this book. So thank you.
Because Asians always, I mean, we're from like developing countries, so we always take our shoes off before going to the house. But I feel like a lot of my American friends are like track their shoes into the bedroom and on the bed or on the sofa. And yeah, but now it's become a hygiene thing.
Yeah.
Okay. One of my favorite questions for this sort of early dating thing is do your days tend to look the same or follow the same patterns? Do you have a strict schedule or are you more spontaneous and come what may? And I wish I had actually, like, this is again one of my aha moments, things that I hadn't asked, but I wish I did because I'm a very scheduled person, but like, I also like room for spontaneity. And I do feel that people I've dated, like either something like my husband's he's very Chinese entrepreneur. Like he doesn't like to have a set schedule. He doesn't even like to commit to like whether, dinner tomorrow. He'll be like, yeah, let's see how we feel tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow we'll go to Hangzhou or we'll go to this other city. And that used to really bother me because I have my schedule. I'm like, I have my work calls. I have calls with the US. Like I need this, I need that. But once you kind of like have an expectation of each other, then you kind of know like, because so much of dating is planning, right? It's like, should
Yeah.
we be planning ahead? Because then he'll be like, oh, well, let's go to that restaurant tonight. I'll be, well, that restaurant's fully booked tonight because you have to book 2 days in advance, which you couldn't commit to.
Wait, I want to bring something up. I'm so glad because to be clear, we're talking about things that you think you should talk about on the first few dates, but you just read question 230 and there are 250 questions in the book. So that one's technically at the end of the book. But to be clear, that one's at the end of the book because that comes in the routines and rituals chapter. So the book follows my sort of transatlantic love story. And I address the issues in the book by chapter as I dealt with them in my relationship. So routines and rituals was something that I wanted to put on at the end because I feel very strongly about that. But just because something's question 230 doesn't mean you shouldn't be asking it in your first few dates.
Yeah, and it feels like overall, kind of in general, this book is, as you said before, it's kind of like go through, ask the questions that you feel appropriate to ask in the moment. You'll
And
know.
in your situation. Yeah,
Yeah, and
you
you don't
will
have to
know.
ask everyone. If both of you don't want animals, you don't have to ask all the animal questions. You can just ask the first one and move on.
Yeah.
But at the same point, like if you've been in a relationship for 10, 15, 20 years, there's a lot of questions in here that you probably haven't asked. The goal here, it seems to be, is the biggest problem facing most relationships and why most fail or many fail is because of a lack of communication. And that is what this book is about. It's about finding those questions that will unlock communication. It's not about the answer as much as the conversation that they spark and listening to one another and learning like and then taking that information might have zero value in the moment, but like, a month later, it might be exactly what you need to remember to your point, Sarah, when you're in the middle of a fight or like when planning a fun like Valentine's Day date or something like that. So anyway.
It's also
Yeah.
easier to revisit something if you've talked about it before. So if you start your relationship talking about things like money and sex, if one of you is feeling unsatisfied sexually a few years in and you've talked about sex before, it's never easy to bring up, but it's certainly easier to bring up if you've talked about it first. Now,
Yeah,
to your
let's save those though, because we're
okay,
gonna come across those as we get on the life cycle. Okay,
okay.
so we've done when you're single, we did early dates. How about when you're falling in like, right? And usually that's like I feel like date 3 to 5, you kind of know, usually by day 3 to 5, if this is going to go somewhere and you're going to like be exclusive, or if it's not really going to go somewhere and it's going to be a situationship, or it's going to just kind of like, peter out. What, after a few dates, when you sense the potential for something deeper, what are the questions that we should be asking to move the relationship beyond that surface level?
So I picked 2 here, but again, there's so many, and people fall in like and then love at varying speeds. Sometimes I think people fall in love before they fall in like, actually. If you've had started having sex early and you feel like there's something there with this person you could be falling in love with, and I'm always like, if that's super soon, take a minute and fall in like with them as well. But so two that I picked. There are many that could be right for this, but which would you choose, laundry or dishes? I choose that because it's a really fun question to answer. And I did that question on a podcast with the host, and I had him pick a number, and that's what he picked. And in the answer, we both answered it. I could tell you about college stories about him not loading the dishwasher and just leaving dishes in the sink, and him getting called nicknames for it and never speaking to his roommates again after they ended their living together. And then I learned about why he doesn't like doing laundry, but why he's okay putting it away. Like all these things. And it was a fun conversation. But you also hear what someone's telling you about how they live and sort of what's important to them. So that was one. And then what rituals, routines, and traditions did your family observe growing up? Daily prayer, Sunday dinner, family game night, yearly photos. And are they important to you now? Again, that tells you about the kind of person that you're with. It tells you about their childhood. It tells you about what they like to do now. If they have independent thought, are they doing something that's routinized for them because it was always done when they were growing up? But it's also a fun question to answer. And then you can often get into what you like doing together at that point.
I wish I asked that question, would you do laundry or dishes, with this guy I dated. He actually said to me, he said, you should be doing the laundry because you were a woman.
How'd that go over?
Can you believe it still took me 2 months before breaking up with his sorry ass? Like, I was like, are
Oh,
you
Sarah.
serious? And by the way, I always clean up after myself, especially if I'm sharing a space with somebody. Uh, and so I like things to be clean. And he was extremely messy. Like he would leave stuff everywhere, but then he would expect me to clean up after him. And if I'd asked that question early on, I would have saved myself like a lot of wasted time with him. But also the way he would have answered that question would have shown like kind of how the family he grew up in, because his mother, in his own words, he said, was basically a glorified maid. So she would come out wearing very, very expensive things, but the way his father treated the mother, she had to do these things because she was a woman, and she was never valued or appreciated, and that's very sad. And if you hear that, run in the other direction. Like look at how his mother's role in the family, and you will know what he expects your role to be.
Also, there's something really important in what you said too. You joked about it, but the point is when someone answers these questions or any questions, listen to them. Please listen to them. He gave you something, and had you actually listened to it, it would have clued you in earlier than it did. People don't often hide who they are, but a lot of us also don't listen to what people are telling us, especially when we want it.
Believe this is a bigger question, but like, do you believe people can change? Do you listen to people and say, oh, this person is telling me who they are? Is that who they will be? And if you don't like the answer, run, or what's the line there?
So I think that's a pretty, like what he said to you, Sarah, like that was pretty indication of something. I think it is a varying degree in a sliding scale. I think, look, people ask me all the time when I talk about this book, how do you know the person is telling you the truth? In due course, you know, if they look, I'm not talking about a sociopath or someone who is stealing from you and has done this to 10
Most
other
people
people.
don't hide the truth. Most people
Yeah,
don't care to hide the truth.
yeah.
You'd be
But
surprised. You get the truth more than you ask for.
yeah, exactly. So again, barring sociopaths from this psychopaths from this conversation, I think that people's actions mirror what they say. You just have to be paying attention.
They are who they are.
Yeah. I
Yep.
do
Yeah.
believe that. Look, I
I
said
believe
very
that too.
early on, I don't iron. That's just one thing. I don't know.
I don't either. I cannot. I'm
Me
not.
too.
That's why
I
I like
don't.
to buy wrinkle-free clothes.
That was the whole point of the conversation at the time.
This is amazing. I gotta get in a club with your husbands because I iron everything in my house too.
You're going to have a delivery coming to you from my house very soon. It's going to say with love and then my husband's name.
Oh, that's so funny.
Okay, so moving on to the next stage where we enter sort of more serious dating and commitment. What questions do you ask when you're building emotional intimacy, right? So once you're exclusive, you want to deepen the bond. What questions foster understanding and emotional safety?
First one, how are we different? Could this be a source of future conflict? Just get it out there. If you're getting serious, you really like someone, this is a great discussion to have. This doesn't have to be and your parents would sit you down and be like, we need to have a talk. These don't have to be serious sit down conversations. They can be when you're having a walk. You can go to dinner over a glass of wine. You can have a bowl of ice cream. You can be playing tennis and do things on the changeover. This is something that if you keep in a lighter way, it doesn't have to seem so deal breakery, right? But that is a really important question to ask. So that's one. Number two, was the way in which your nuclear family was perceived by outsiders, friends, neighbors, coworkers, extended family, an accurate presumption? Did your family portray itself one way in public, but function differently at home? I love this question. And it brings up a lot about our families. But if you're getting serious about someone, then I think you should think about it first yourself, and I think you should ask it. Back to this question that I advised asking when you were single. Do you want to emulate your parents' marriage or relationship? Why or why not? It's time to talk to your potential partner about that. And then we also spoke about this. How do you fight? How do I fight? How do we fight? And how does that feel?
The family questions are so important. We kind of talked about before, like the way kind of you grew up and the relationships that you had with your family members, your siblings, your parents. Those will come out in the future. But at the same time, you're also probably at this point getting to know their family, and you probably have your own opinions about them and about if their relationship's one that you want to emulate or not. So that's all of that.
Look, you could be going to meet them, right? And you have this experience and you come out and you're like, God, you have the most perfect family. Is this real? Is this how it is? And then you answer that question and your partner's like, yeah, they put on a show for you today.
Wow. Yeah.
I have another one to throw out, and maybe this is on your list for later, Lindsay, but this feels like it came kind of early in your book. It seemed like it was connected to kind of your earlier relationships before you found the Brit. If we eliminated physical attraction from your relationship, what would be left? And I feel like thinking about the title of your book, Romance and Practicalities, oftentimes we start relationships with a lot of romance and no practicalities. And then we move to a stage where there's a lot of practicalities, but maybe not a lot of romance. And so this feels like, for that early stage, a really important one to figure out, okay, well, how deep is this relationship really? Is this lust, or is this like and love, and what are the layers? Are we building something, or is this just we really like hooking up, right?
Yeah, or is it just a friendship because we
Right.
actually like doing stuff, but we don't have the same goals? I love that question.
I love that question too.
One of the sort of pivotal points in my dating life in my 20s was when a boy I liked pointed out to me that I was not asking questions. We were in the same section at Harvard Business School. So we were section mates, right? And your section, it's like each section is like 80, 90 kids. And your first year, you take your classes together every day together. And there's always this rule, which is like, don't date in your section. As we started to kind of build emotional intimacy, one day he said, and I wrote this in my etiquette book, Mind Your Manners. He said, you're not like other girls. And I was like, no. I was like, maybe he's going to compliment me. And he said, I was like, really? How am I not? And he said, well, other girls at this point would say, what do I mean to you? Are we exclusive? What do you think of me? My initial reaction was, gosh, like how insecure these girls must be to have to ask that, because I'm so confident, like I don't even need to ask that. It was clear that he was saying this, like not necessarily in a good way, and that and that this was kind of like a hindrance of our relationship kind of going deeper and becoming more emotionally intimate. And when I had some time to think and reflect on that, I was like, gosh, like maybe it's actually a sign of my insecurity, because those are the questions you should be asking. And now I think, if going back, like, and actually after that, like for all my dating relationships, I did ask. I would be like, what do you think of me? Where do you see this going?
I don't know that I agree with your assessment of this. In a way, I might think that he might have been intimidated by how secure you were in yourself and your life. And he didn't maybe feel like he was needed enough. And maybe he wasn't confident enough to say, hey, I just want to tell you how I feel about you. He needed you to ask him so that he had a reason to say to you, here's how I feel about you. Because actually, the questions to know, what do you think about me, are not, what do you think about me? There's nothing specific in there. Like, if you notice, all my questions have I answers. And once you both answer with I, then you can talk about the we. It's not, what feature of mine do you find the most attractive? Oh, I like your eyes. Your eyes are beautiful. Oh, thanks so much. Do you know what I mean? It's not that. And so part of me thinks he was intimidated that you didn't need him to say that to you.
So actually, that was an issue in a lot of my dating life, where I was very intimidating for the guys because I never seemed to care. But the problem is that I would care, but I didn't express that I cared.
But I do know that a lot of girls, women, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, they want the man to say, I love you first.
You know, they say like there are cat people and dog people. So if you prefer cats, you're the one to wait for the other person to say, I love you first. And if you prefer dogs, you're the first one to say, I love you to your partner, which I thought was kind of cute.
I've never heard that before.
Oh, that's funny.
I think we need to dig into that.
What if it's two cat lovers? You're screwed.
Yeah, I know.
There's just no communication ever.
Yeah.
What about deciding on commitment, right? That next stage of the relationship where, so before making a long-term commitment or moving in together, what questions should we be asking to assess long-term compatibility?
Number one, is there anything you feel you wouldn't be able to accomplish if you married me?
Going back to what my fears were in the beginning, that kind of that idea that marriage is not an additive thing, but a choice between two things is an important one.
Yeah, like what if someone said, it's been my dream to go live in an Asian country and work for an Asian bank to get that global experience, and I just don't think you would do that. And then the other person can say, you know what, that's not for me. Or, are you kidding? That sounds amazing. Of course I would do that with you. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want your partner to give up on their dreams or to be resentful about something. And that's a really honest conversation. You can't know everything when you answer this question, but if there's something that comes to mind, please have the courage to say it.
My first sort of serious relationship where I loved the other person, when I was about 22, 23 years old in New York City, and he was a Brit. And he was at Columbia Business School. I was working as an investment banking analyst in New York City. And he graduated and he was moving back to London. And I was actually going to go to Beijing to do nonprofit. But my dream was, I knew I wanted to go to business school. So I was taking the GMATs, I was visiting Harvard Business School, Columbia Business School, all these business schools. He told me, he said, you know, you should consider London Business School. Right. And he was obviously moving back to London. And I thought about it, and I said, James, I love you, but there are some things that I need to do in my life, and my dream is to go to Harvard Business School. And so, like, I love you, but I don't see this relationship going beyond, you know, you're graduating and moving back, and me moving, you know, to China, because there are things that I need to do before I settle down in my life. And he you know, and he got it. He got it.
You essentially had this exact conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you know, breakups are tough anyway, but I felt so mature about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt proud of myself for taking, like, proactively, like, communicating that, but in a really in a really fair, balanced, and loving way.
You should have been proud of yourself. I mean, 22 to have that foresight is pretty great.
Because I feel that conflict comes from miscommunication and misunderstanding. So the more that we can just make things clear, I feel being clear is being kind. And if
Love
we can
that.
follow that, right, it just like, it saves us so much conflict.
So second question at this point, and look, money is a beast. Okay. And the question that everybody thinks to ask about money is, how much money do you make? What's your salary? That is like the least important question,
But
actually.
by the way, that question is in your list.
But that's a date one question, Sarah.
Of course it is. Obviously. It can't not be on my list, but that's like the tiniest money question. So this one, if you're really talking about commitment, would you want to maintain separate or shared bank accounts for all of our money? Some of it? Really important question.
Oh yeah, Marcel, what's your take?
I think the answer for people kind of goes back to family too, right? It probably goes back to what mom and dad did. I bet like if divorce, factored heavily in past, relationships in your family, that would factor in. For me personally, like when it came time for like move in together, or actually I think it was once we got married, my expectation was like, yeah, we would just have the same bank accounts and the same credit cards. And my wife did not have that expectation. And so our money is our money and her money is her money and my money is her money. And that's, that's fine. That works for us. But, for her, that came from a place of wanting to feel, stability and wanting to, she came from a family where that was important for the women in the family to have their own money, and that was important for her. And I think that was not a question that we talked about, right? It kind of goes to assumptions, right? If you don't ask the question, you make assumptions.
Yep.
And when you make assumptions, that's where conflict comes in. So probably a question we should have asked.
And in the book, because money is such a beast, you're not on any of these chapters, you're not just left to fend for yourself. Like, I tried to really hold your hand as you're reading this book to make people not feel alone as they're reading it. So, for example, Susie Orman talks a lot about how things should be divided. If you want to divide, questions you should answer, things like if you're taking a step back in your job to raise kids, but you feel that you should still have your own money, how that works. So there are ways to give you ideas here for how you should do things, not just here are questions you should ask.
Yeah, I also feel money stuff is very cultural in more sort of patriarchal societies like Latin countries or Middle Eastern countries or Asian countries. It's just an expectation, like the man takes care of everything. But in some Nordic countries, European countries, or parts of the US, right, that it's a different story. It's about like splitting, sharing. And one of my favorite movies is The Joy Luck Club. It's a very old movie, but it talks about how one of the American-born Chinese daughters, she marries an American guy. And literally, like on the fridge, there's lists of the grocery. They split it like down to the cent. Electricity bill, they split it down to the cent, and it sort of drives her nuts. Yeah, I think it's one of those conversations you want to have before getting married, and ideally before the wedding invitations go out.
That's why this was for commitment. This is like, you're serious enough to have these conversations, but when you're on the cusp of like, look, if you're moving in with someone, you should start having money conversations, right? But if you're really thinking about spending your life with someone, money plays into everything you do, from your daily coffee and your theories on whether you should spend on that latte or not, to how much money you spend on things for your home and outside, right? So this is a big conversation that has to be had.
Also kind of feeding into it, we've talked about it before, Sarah, but prenups, right? Like a prenup is, I don't know if it's here or shortly after, but that's another one of those questions that you got to ask before the wedding invitations go out, because, I know of some people who have kind of, the wedding's on, and then that question comes up and they have two very different ideas about it, and then the wedding's off.
Yeah, that's our episode with Mary, the agent from Selling Sunset, because she talks in her book about how she suffered from financial abuse. So listeners, definitely check out episode 1 with Mary Bonnet to hear about the etiquette of doing a prenup. So what about moving into the next stage where you're already married or you're in a long-term partnership? We want to keep the connection alive, right? Let's start with the early years of marriage. What questions can we ask to encourage ongoing intimacy and shared growth?
So I think you always need to be asking questions. That's the thing. You can't stop asking questions. That's what a lot of people fall into a rut of, our lives are busy. If you have kids, if you don't have kids, whatever it is, you can coexist and you can coast, but you should always still ask questions. I only picked one for this section, actually. So drum roll, here it is. Do we have good sex? Is there anything you'd like me to do differently?
That's important.
It is so important. And listen, our sexual appetites change as our lives get busier, less busy, our bodies change, our seasons change, things change, and you're not always going to have that same passionate sex that you had when you first got to know someone. And it's very important to not leave this question too long.
If you leave it alone, that's when bad things happen. That's when
Correct.
affairs start. And there was just an article that came out in the Times, I think yesterday, about Gen Xers, after either opening their relationships or kind of moving on and getting divorced or whatever, like in their late 40s, having the best sex of their life. And because they now know who they are, they're more confident, more experienced, and it feels like that is an area where it's so taboo oftentimes to talk about, but if you do, it's an area where you can grow with your partner, as opposed to an area where it kind of goes back to, the types of the places, relationships and money where we're not educated. People learn about sex through porn instead of, through like like people kind of teaching them how to have loving relationships. And so that is, I totally agree. That's a massive one to keep asking.
Again, it's a lot easier to talk about it when things are great. So start talking about it when things are great. Start talking about what you like. Start talking about your pleasures. Really keep that conversation going. And it's so easy to take a lack of whatever personally. So instead of having the conversation, it's so easy to say, well, maybe we're not having sex because of this, when really your partner could be going through a health issue and you just don't know, right? And it has nothing to do with you and you're taking it personally. So have that dialogue and keep that dialogue alive.
Yeah, I feel like the topic of menopause really blew up in the past year. Like in terms of headlines, celebrities talking about it, right? Like Oprah Winfrey talked about it, then Gayle King, then Drew Barrymore had a hot flash on camera, and now Naomi Watts famously said she went into menopause at the age of 37. And I feel now when I'm with my older friends who are in their 40s or 50s, they're joking around, like, at like just Christmas parties and everything, they're joking around about menopause sex and menopause itch. And it's something that like half the world will go into, which affects, the other half of the world.
It affects your hormones, so it affects your sex drive.
And what about from the early years of marriage to, let's say, like a decade or more into the relationship?
Number one, do we have good sex? Is there anything you'd like me to do differently? Yes,
It sounds like we should be asking that question like pretty often.
Sensing a trend.
And then I threw this one in there. I really like this question. I think you get into a pattern in your lives and you should ask, are we satisfied with the quality and quantity of the friends we currently have? Would we like to be more involved socially? Are we overwhelmed socially? And should we cut back on such commitments? Again, your life drives forward whether you want to take part in it or not. And our lives are busy. People's lives are busy. When you have two partners in a relationship or three or four, however you like to do it, you get busy. And unless you take a step back and ask yourself these questions, sometimes you're on a hamster wheel of social commitments, or one of you's tired, one of you's not, and then you're getting into this bad pattern of unhappiness about how your lives outside of your work life are working. And unless you sit down and have this conversation, you just kind of go with the flow of it all, and you could make it so much more satisfying for your partnership.
That's true. Almost like being passive and letting life drive you, as opposed to you being in the driver's seat and making very deliberate and intentional choices about your life. Like, I mean, the friends you keep are really important. I saw this statistic on social media where it's like, if you spend time within 30 feet of a high performer, your performance goes up. And then if you spend time with a low performer, it's like your performance like more than like goes down. I mean, it's just like, I believe like, you know, there's that phrase like birds of a feather flock together.
You know, when COVID hit and we had to eliminate everything from our lives and then choose how we partook in our lives after, I know me included, so many people who were much more deliberate about how they spent their time and with whom. It's easy to lose sight of that, and it's so important to ask.
Okay, well, we wanted to end on a fun little segment, which is called the awkward questions. These are the questions that did not make it into your book, but we want to get your thoughts on them, and they cover a couple things. When do you ask what the other person likes when it comes to sex, pubic hair, kinks, and smells? Should we go through each of them?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm loving this. I'm loving this so much. Okay. When
we
do
hope
you
we didn't
ask?
catch you off guard. Let's start off with sex.
I feel like we've learned from Lindsay, the question is always
Always
ask about sex.
Well, that's the thing.
Says the man.
When you start talking about sex early, you should never know what your partner does or doesn't like. That doesn't mean there will be things that come out later, right? Or you can say, hey, like, what are your fantasies? Let's try something new. What have you been thinking about? I was watching porn. I saw this. Can we try it? Do you want to do this together? So I think that's a constant dialogue.
Yeah, so constant dialogue, and I feel it's important to be open-minded, right?
Yes,
Like
always.
to not be judgmental. You want to be open-minded because again, you want to provide that safe space. You want your partner to feel like they can tell you anything, even their craziest like desires or most embarrassing moments.
All these sex questions you don't necessarily have to have in bed. Sometimes they're sexier when you're out for a walk.
That's a good point, Lindsay. It's kind of like, yeah, when do you ask? Yeah, when do you ask these questions? When?
Because then there's pressure to like perform, no pun intended, right?
Like
So,
if you're naked in bed, like, okay, I want, you know.
Yeah, but no, seriously, because then I know like certain people would be like, do you mean like right now? You want to try that? No, go for a walk, talk about this over dinner. And then you both have something to look forward to when you get back.
Yeah.
Okay, next one, pubic hair. You know, I mean, I feel like the older generation prefers full bush. I feel like millennials kind of, it's a crapshoot. Maybe it's landing strip. Maybe.
Have you taken a survey, Sarah? I'm curious how you have this insight.
Well, I feel like I should.
That's
because,
coming.
No
pun intended.
Oh, geez, we're on fuego.
And then I feel like younger ones are going fully bare. When like it's like there's this running joke that if younger kids are in the changing room and they see somebody's bush, they're like, "Holy crap, what is that?" Right? So and people do have preferences, right? Like I feel like, I mean, women have preferences about their own pubic hair, but men may also have preferences. So
my gut here. Hold on, and then please chip in. My gut here.
I'm gonna get in trouble.
No, my gut here is if you feel really confident in your grooming, that's when you should ask, because it's always nice to know what your partner prefers, but you don't have to change what your way is just for your partner. Again, I think my husband would be happy with whatever, to be honest with you. He has a preference, but at the end of the day, he'd be happy with whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably something where, kind of just be a clean person. And then if someone has a certain desire, so you never want it to be a turnoff, but if they have a certain desire for what they are hoping out of you, you create a comfortable enough environment where they can bring that up.
is it okay to ask like what your partner like?
Sure. Absolutely. I think like, yeah, again, probably not first date, right? If we're going to kind of navigate to where this goes.
Unless he's getting real lucky on that first date.
No, yeah, well, but I feel like you don't have the right to, express your opinions about someone else's body on the first date. But once it starts getting serious and you guys are hanging out, exclusively, it feels like at that point, maybe it's a good time to bring that up if it matters to you, and it won't matter to everybody, right?
I think if you're sharing some fun, like sexy time stories or like past experiences, you can always throw it in then too.
Okay, what about kinks?
So kinks is something you have to be very comfortable with talking about. I think you should, again, be comfortable talking about your own kinks before you ask someone else theirs, because it's not fair if you ask them their kinks, but you're not willing to say your own. That one I don't think should be pre-planned. I really do. When it feels right, if it feels right, and if it feels needed, just go for it. Don't overthink it.
I wonder if it's like if there's like a fun game, right? Like a never have I ever type thing where you can kind of like share these kinds of things with, make a night of it, nice bottle of wine. I don't know. It's like these
You
are
can do
awkward
that with these
questions.
questions though, but you can do
Yeah.
those with any of these
Yeah.
questions. There are people that every week they go out to try a different restaurant and take a subset of questions and try it, and it becomes a thing.
To that point, Lindsay, I feel as I was kind of reading through them also, I was kind of like, these are not all just questions for your romantic partner. These questions work in a lot of different relationships, and sometimes it'll be even more fun. Like I'm just thinking, I learned so much about my wife when her sister comes over and they're hanging out and just telling stories. I'm like, oh, wait, what happened when you were in high school? And so bringing these questions out in kind of a group setting is can be enlightening, even potentially even more so.
So I got a text today from a friend who I respect tremendously. She's another writer, and she finally sat down, read the book, loved the book. She has a 15-year-old daughter, an only child, and she and her husband, everything except the sex chapter, they've kept the book out on their dining table for the past few days. And they are going through the questions as a family. And she
That's
said
very
that
cool.
her daughter, I never even thought about this. So shout out to Nikki. Her daughter is loving thinking about these things, but also hearing her parents talk about these things. Talk
Yeah.
about setting up healthy communication. How cool is that?
Wow, that is so great.
Like, think about, you brought up truth or dare or never have I ever, right?
Hmm.
Think about when you're a kid or whenever you're playing this game and you're the person who has to ask the question, that paralysis you feel about thinking of a great question.
Right.
So let's take the thinking out of the question bit and just allow you to figure out your answers.
Our last item on the awkward questions is smells, which I think also goes back to hygiene. And there are actually multiple Reddit posts left by
I bet.
women and I'll read an example. My boyfriend said my vagina smells sour and musty and is off-putting.
Oh,
He's usually very patient and kind, but he said he's repulsed by it and says it's some kind of biological aversion. Because of the way his brain reacts to it, he thinks it's a serious problem and his primal instinct is telling him to steer clear. I need your help, ladies.
Yeah, so I like questions like this, actually. So it's very easy to become self-conscious about something like that. But frankly, this woman should be saying thank you to this person for having the courage to say that something's going on down there. Because frankly, if you smell that bad down there, then there could be a health issue. So like he could be saving her life, actually. Or she could need to get medically checked out. So now that's an extreme, but again, it takes a lot of courage to say that you don't like someone's perfume or their body smell or this, that, and the other. But if someone is willing to go there with you, I actually think you need to thank them and really try not to take it as personally as possible. If you feel that way, don't do your partner a disservice by not bringing it up.
and also, Sarah, you should send them a box of Antivorta.
Well, obviously.
Oh yeah, Lindsay. That is my feminine care brand. We have wash wipes and sprays for our listeners out there. Everything's formulated with.
I'm loving them.
Yeah.
Loving them. Yes, yes. They feel so clean and fresh and like I'm taking care of a part of my body that not that was neglected, but that I was just kind of like cleaning like the rest of my body every day in the shower. So yes, it's a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah, so listeners out there, if you have issues with vaginal dryness or odor, or you just want to elevate your intimate care routine, definitely check out Antivorta, my feminine care brand. Everything's made with traditional Chinese medicine.
Oh, well, I just had one kind of like one final question, which is beyond the book. So the book has 250 questions, which can be a lot when you look at it in at one point. But over the course of our relationships, we're going to ask a lot more questions than that. And getting into the practice of asking questions requires kind of more than what we've just talked about today, which is like 1 to 4 questions at every kind of life stage of your relationship. Are there any are there any ideas that you have for continuing that practice? I started thinking about this yesterday and started looking at apps. I don't know if there are any apps that kind of send daily questions, or if you have any other resources that you would point to help people continue to ask questions that can help the relationship.
So yeah, I think that's a great last question about questions. First and foremost, start asking questions early and often. And I tell people to have regular check-ins about things. So whether it's money, sex, kids, your personal lives, just sit down and take a minute for yourselves and your partner and start doing that. I do have some other things in the works, to exactly your point, of ways to bridge the gap to not forget about this practice. Something else that I advocate is find rituals and routines that work for you and your partner so that you can always go back to them. So, and Sarah knows this because we talked about it, but I do the New York Times crossword puzzle in bed with my husband every night, and we play some of the other games. There's even an FT quiz that we do every week. And for us, those are such grounding rituals that kind of build up your emotional bank account with your partner. So if you're apart for a while, or you forget to do them for a while, or you're tired, or you're up at night and you forget to do them, those are grounding things that you can come together and do, and they make you feel reset. And once you start being reset, then you'll start asking questions again because you feel closer and you feel more intimate. So learn your routines and come back to them when you need them. Thank you guys for
Lindsay,
having me. This was so much fun.
thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on the pod. Everybody out there, remember to like, subscribe, and check us out on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in to Mind Your Manners. I'm your host and etiquette life guide, Sara Jane Ho, and remember, no matter what life throws at you, with me in your ear, we got this.